Hey, Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Joe?
Good, man. I love the interview that is following this introduction because it's a former Quiet Light client. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, for years and years, I wanted to interview clients from Quiet Light, and a lot of people, they were understandably not wanting to talk about just exiting their business for seven figures or even high six figures. They were private people. But Dan, after he sold his business, I think we closed his business in February of this year, 2017. He actually went out to Forbes and a few other large outlets and got published in there for being able to start up a company and sell it for seven figures within a few years. He reached out to me. I was super happy he did. And I'm going to actually take advantage of this real quick and just say, if anyone is listening, if you have a story about selling your business that you'd be willing to share, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to interview you. It makes for some of the best content, I think, for both buyers and sellers.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's a story about somebody selling their business or buying a business and what they did with it, and some of the things that they learned there as well. I like this particular story with Dan because it reminds me of so many conversations we have with a lot of different clients along the way, and that is, look, you're not ready to sell.
Yeah.
Strangely, what you did to me back in 2010, which was go away, because you're not going to get what you want here. Go away, keep doing what you're doing, be patient, and come back. And Dan did that. He got some advice from Amanda, I believe, right? And came back and sold his business for well over his initial goal, but it was several years later, and surpassed his goal by quite a number over the years, right?
Yeah, and we talk about that in the interview. His original goal when he started up Science of Skill was to sell it for maybe 250, 300, maybe $400,000. Ended up being a seven-figure exit. Now, some of that was good for him. Some of that wasn't because he was working two businesses at the time. So he was working hard, no doubt about that. But some of the things that he had to do to prepare the business for sale are things that we talk about. And we've talked a lot about things such as transferability. But Science of Skill is a martial arts-based website. He sells products and he has lessons and classes and everything online. Well, he's a martial arts expert himself. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and really launched the site based off videos of him taking down much larger opponents, including a UFC participant. He actually beat him in a brown belt competition. And so there's a real issue with transferability here, right? You have a guy who's built a brand based off his own personal success. He had to take a few years to really get the business in a place where anybody could take it over and create standard operating procedures that would take him out of the business. And something he says in here, which again, I'll let him say it in more detail, but he says there's two things about removing yourself from the business. One is removing your name from the bottom of the emails where you're the brand. Another is removing yourself from the process where you're crucial to understanding how the business works. And he talks about both of those things, how he went through that process to be able to prepare the business for sale and some of the challenges he went through in doing that. Very, very fascinating for anybody looking for an exit down the road. This is an absolute must listen to interview because he's done it. And again, massive growth in terms of value over just a couple of years.
And before we jump to it, just the fact that it paid off. He was given some advice, I'm sure, from more than just Amanda or you if you spoke to him early on. But he did the work that was required to remove himself from that, so it was more transferable. He made money along the way, and then he had, instead of a six-figure, he wound up with a seven-figure exit. So kudos to him, kudos to Amanda, to you, for anybody that spoke to him early on for doing all that work and him listening and making it happen.
Yeah, and so Jason was actually the one that sold the business for him. He absolutely loves Jason, gives him all sorts of stuff. I'm telling you this, Joe, because you know that if Jason listens to this, he's going to yell at us for not giving him credit, right?
Jason Yellowitz sold my business. He's amazing. He's incredible. He's superhuman. He's good looking, better looking than what's the guy that he looks like, the celebrity that he looks like.
He looks like Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller.
Looks like Ben Stiller. Hey,
He's
if you're listening to this,
better looking, more physically fit person than Ben Stiller. There you go, Jason.
yeah, and if you guys are listening to this, send Jason a little love note right now. He'll absolutely love it. Jason Y at quietlightbrokerage.com. But you know what? Let's do this. Dan actually has tons of praise for Jason as well. Why don't we stop boring people with you and I and actually get into the really good stuff here?
Let's go to it.
All right. All right. Hey, Dan, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here, Mark. Cool to be here.
I know a lot of podcast hosts like to do all the introduction for their guests and everything, but we like to make it easy and let you introduce yourself. If you could just introduce yourself real quick to our viewers and listeners listening to the podcast, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure, man. Whatever pans out well for you. So, well, I know you, Mark, because you guys are the ones that sold my company. So that's the easy introduction here is you guys sold our business. About 5 years ago, I decided life purpose-wise, I would focus on sort of the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. And in order to do that, Mark, there's two ways you can get money. You can raise it, or you can make it. And so I come from a small town. I don't really know how to pitch people. So I grew and sold a multi-million-dollar e-commerce company called Science of Skill. Jason, your broker fellow, was the guy who sold it. And we actually just finished the transaction February of this year. So now I run a company called Tech Emergence, which is a media and market research firm in the artificial intelligence domain, which was the goal all along. Didn't have to give away any equity. Made my own bucks by getting a 7-figure exit thanks to Jason. So I'm an e-commerce guy who built it for the sake of funding a bigger dream.
Yeah, and for anyone listening to this, we probably already covered this in the introduction when I talked to Joe, but you can find a lot of articles about Dan if you just do a search on your name. It comes up on Business Insider, on Forbes, and many other places. And what I love the article in Business Insider because it talks about how you started Science of Skill because of a roof collapse. I mean, It's such a nice way to intro it. Would you mind sharing the story? Because I think it's awesome.
I'll go into it, man. I'll go into it. Yeah, it's fun to look back on. It wasn't fun when it was happening, but the roof collapse tale was a good one. So it's kind of a combination of two things. The roof collapse was the bad part of it. We had a YouTube channel at the time that was kind of the good part of it. So I'll go into what was going on. In order to pay for graduate school and to kind of live on my own, I never really had a job. I was, since a late teenager, I was training mixed martial arts, and I did, all my friends are paying for college by delivering pizzas and selling insurance and just doing things I'd just significantly rather jump off of like a really tall building than do. So I was like, man, it'd be great to try to pay my way through, Ivy League graduate school by teaching fighters how to, win tournaments. So I was running a martial arts academy in a very small town, Mark, where I come from, and doing a lot of competing. And basically one winter, I think this is February of 2012 or 2011, I can't even remember right now, but it snowed for like 2 days straight. And then it rained for like 3 days straight. So we had like 1.5 feet of snow or like a foot of snow, and then just all of it was rain on top of that. And I was in a building that was in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, New England. There's a lot of these old mill buildings. They were built way back in the day. I think this building was built in like 1837 or something. And as it turns out, the roof wasn't all that steady. And all of a sudden we had a bunch of openings in the ceiling, some beams bending and whatever the case may be. And we had huge, like funnels of water like this wide just coming directly through like particular different openings all above the academy. And I had just spent basically my life savings up until that point to expand from 2,000 to about 4,500 square feet for the martial arts gym. So it just was like, I've been saving up since I was teaching private lessons, running this gym for the last, couple of years while I was going to school, spent all that on really growing it so we could expand the student base. Boom. All the drywall is rotten. All the mats are soggy wet. All that kind of stuff goes down. Luckily, we survived. We had some great students, loyal students who came in, helped with the disaster kind of relief situation. Somebody had a wet vac, thank God. Otherwise, I would have to throw all my mats away. That was like my life savings in mats. And we were able to pull through. But what it did for me, Mark, is it made it very clear that, I would like to have some way of ensuring revenue without depending on creaky physical infrastructure. And I'd also like to derive revenue from somewhere other than my 4,000 square foot town. And that was always the goal, right? I had dreams of moving out here to the Bay Area, getting involved in AI. I would need a way to fund that. It wasn't going to be a martial arts gym. But the prompt to really get started on what that next thing was, oh God, there's slush falling on my head while I'm teaching kids how to do martial arts. So that was the bad side. There was an upside to that, but that was the bad side.
Yeah, disaster often spurs us to whatever's coming next. And what came next? What came next? If I'm not mistaken, is Science of Skill, right?
Science of Skill, yeah. Science of Skill was at that point, Mark. It was a blog for me. So I started writing Science of Skill. I went to graduate school at University of Pennsylvania. I focused on sports psychology in undergrad. I focused on the kind of cognitive science of skill development in grad school. So how do we come to develop skills, whether it be in music or sport performance or memorization? And there's a lot of interesting research about that. That's what I focused on. Use myself as a guinea pig with those skill development approaches to go win tournaments. And so this was a blog that wasn't all that popular, but I was basically just using it as a journal to apply what I was learning in grad school to, going out and trying to win national titles. And I had won a national title at that point at the Nogi Pan Ams as a brown belt. And I had one video, Mark, online. It's called Dan Fagella versus the Giant. I'm pretty sure it's still up online somewhere. But it's me in a match against. So I did a lot of absolute division matches. So I walk around at about 124 pounds right now, Mark. So I'm a pretty small guy. But I have done a lot of tournaments fighting 200-pound, 180-pound guys, just open weight expert division stuff around New England and elsewhere. So I have a match where I tap out this UFC fighter. The guy's by the name is Pat Walsh. Fought in the UFC. Big name guy. For New England to get into the UFC is a big deal. D1 wrestler, very strong, 200-something pounds of raw muscle. And I tapped him out with a leg lock in about 12 seconds. Now, it was fortunate. I don't think I'm that much better than Pat. I think it was the luck of the draw, to be honest with you. But it worked out, and I got to say, I'm a 100-pound schmo that tapped out a UFC fighter in 12 seconds. And that video, without being promoted, just kind of popped off on its own. It just became a thing on the web, and a number of my other videos fighting much bigger opponents became things that kind of picked up steam on their own. So Science of Skill was a little blog, and all of a sudden there's this dark corner of the internet that's really loving to see a little guy beat the crap out of UFC fighters, right? And so I said, well, I have this skill of instruction. I have a skill of email marketing and a bit of SEO for growing my academy. It was only about $250,000 business. This is a pretty small martial arts gym. Because I'm in a small town. I didn't have a real choice here. We don't have 1 million people to sell to. So I said, okay, can I apply these same skills and basically teach martial arts or self-defense everywhere instead of in this little tiny town in a tiny state? And that was the birth of Science of Skill. And that was what became the revenue stream to get me into artificial intelligence, which was what I planned on all along. So, that was the silver lining, Mark, but it was tough to see when it first happened. It was a pretty depressing time when the roof initially collapsed. I'll say that much.
Usually is when something bad like that happens, to see what's going to come next, right? I'm interested about the YouTube part. How much of your blog taking off was due to those videos? Did that really drive the growth when that just started to skyrocket?
Yeah, it was a big part of people knowing that the blog even existed. I was somewhat consciously writing the blog for myself when I got it started. Pretty esoteric stuff. It was like academic citations to like Anders Ericsson and the founders of goal setting theory, and like applying that to like really niche Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff. But I think the videos kind of shone a light a bit on like, how the hell is this guy training if he's beating these friggin' big guys? And that's what sort of got the blog to be a little bit more popular and made it possible for us to build, or it was just me at the time, there was no us, 600 or so people on an email list, because I just put up a little thing on the side of the site like, hey, if you like this stuff and you want to know how to defeat larger opponents and apply sort of the science of skill development to combat sports, you can sign up here. And that the popularity of the videos, people kind of knowing that now the blog was a thing, was what got us our first kind of little baby list, which helped the business kind of take off from the early days.
Right. And just as a side note, we're actually, I don't know the order that we're going to air these episodes in, but I'm going to have a YouTube expert on to talk about that. So that's
well, I was never a YouTube expert. I could probably learn from them. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, this was kind of a dumb luck thing. We didn't do anything special with the channel, but it was enough to kind of get the engine started, if you will.
Yeah, it's one of those areas, though, and we talk a lot about ways that you can grow a business, right? How can you grow a business both as a seller or as a buyer who's doing an acquisition? How can you grow that sort of business? I think an area that's ignored a lot is YouTube. I think it's a huge area for that people can exploit, but we'll get into that in another episode. and not in this one. Because what I want to talk about, you did a lot of email marketing automation to grow Science of Skill, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. What service did you use?
Initially, off the get-go, I used Aweber because that's what I was using for my martial arts gym. But I switched my martial arts gym to Infusionsoft, and then I switched my online marketing to Infusionsoft as well. And the company to this day, Science of Skill, they've been running it for the last almost a year now. They're still using Infusion at this time. So Infusionsoft was the primary tool, allowed for a lot of segmentation, a lot of automation. We had our struggles with it, but it allowed us to get to a couple $1 million top line and get an exit, and that was good enough for me.
Okay, so for people that don't know what marketing automation is, can you explain what the difference is between marketing automation and maybe a drip campaign or just a broadcast campaign?
Yeah, sure. So the basic tenets around marketing automation, Mark, would be being able to really segment and slice and dice your audience and the experience that they get based on behaviors that they act on, whether that's where they opted in, what they click on, what emails they open, whatever the case may be. And or what they tell you. So if they fill out a survey, they click a button, they let you know something about themselves. So based on criteria that you learn from them, and or based on criteria from their behavior, you kind of change their flow and their experience of how they interact with the company. What message comes next? What offer gets promoted? What content is relevant for them? And this was a very important thing for us getting started in the self-defense space, because different people are interested in learning self-defense for different reasons, and are interested in different topics. So really slicing and dicing the list segmentation-wise, and really slicing and dicing the list in terms of automated channels of marketing was pretty darn pivotal for us to turn up by the time we sold, I think our email list was only about 14,000 people, but we were doing, 2 whatever million bucks in revenue. And so to be able to squeeze that much juice out of not that many oranges in a niche where, martial arts is not the richest niche in the world, Mark. I'm not talking about golfers, right? It's all a bunch of rich retired guys. I'm not talking about, people that own yachts, yacht owners monthly. That's not we're talking about people that live in a small town and have a gun and are interested in self-defense, or they train martial arts somewhere they're interested in self-defense. So squeezing a lot of juice out of a limited number of oranges was really a marketing automation problem for us.
Right. So you focus a lot on that marketing automation problem. How did you get started learning? It's such a big field, right? And can be really complex.
It can be super complicated. You are totally right. I was convinced early on that it was a powerful thing by just people who were making more than I was. And actually, initially, this was in the martial arts academy world. So in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was running basically a fight gym, that, if you have different programs, you have a fitness related program, you have a kids related program. We're in a small town. So if I just wanted to focus on 22-year-old males who want to be fighters like myself, I don't know. There's only really small handful of them guys, right? So we had to have some kind of fitness oriented programs for other folks. We had to have ways to teach kids self-defense and martial arts classes. And we had a pretty successful program for ages 12 and under and 7 and under. And so your marketing messaging to those people is quite different. The videos you're going to send to the male under 30 who really watches MMA and likes it, that's going to be very different than a parent of a 6-year-old who wants their kid to, learn a constructive skill and develop some discipline and possibly learn some fundamentals of self-defense and kind of conflict avoidance. So the messaging has to be different. So in the martial arts gym world, even when I was back with Aweber, which is when I was when the gym was making maybe 90 grand a year, when I was first getting it off the ground, a little tiny puny thing. We had, a campaign. If you opted in to learn more about our kids program, we would have a campaign that would succinctly and continuously sort of reference and talk about the benefits related to that, or MMA was different, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was different. So we had these 3 campaigns when I was a nobody, nothing with no dollars. And I was basically started the gym with a bunch of savings that I had based on teaching private lessons for $40 an hour or some crap. So we had nothing, and we were paying $25 a month for Aweber or whatever. I started marketing automation there and realized, compared to just sending out a broadcast once a week that's the same message to everybody, this is getting more of these folks that kind of enter their email to be on the phone, giving me a call 2 weeks later. And if I can do that to sell a service, then by golly, I should be able to do that to sell a product at a much higher scale. So I was convinced back in the early days, and I was forced to learn it, Mark, to answer your question, running the martial arts academy.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And the way I've heard it described in the past, and that I think makes it easy to understand, is instead of thinking about broadcasting out to a group of 1,000 people, in your case, 14,000,
Yep.
instead of thinking, okay, what sort of message can I send to 14,000 people? You think about the different personas that you have on your list and say, if I were to send just one of these people an email message, what would I tell them? What would I send them? And break it up that way. And
Totally.
the trick is, and of course, that makes sense. I'm sure you're going to agree with this. What is it like to sit down and actually do that work of starting to break that out?
There's a lot of, I used to run a 6-figure consulting business while I was running Science of Skill about email marketing. So I've had to convey and teach these things a million times. I don't do that anymore, but at all. I still have blogs about it and like the things that we've done, but, and so I have simplified versions of how we did this at Science of Skill. They're in video elsewhere. I can send that along for show notes so that people have a video of what the hell I'm talking about, like what it looks like. But the basics are as follows. There is work up front. There's definitely work up front. Before the work up front of doing the copywriting is the work up front of who is your audience and what do they care about. So the most important things to get an understanding of before you start thinking about, okay, what are all the different roads I'm going to send people down, is who the heck are they? And really, in my opinion, there's no shortcut to calling people. So if you sell in e-commerce, it's really nice. You never have to interact with humans. But if you want to grow a business, you want to double every year. You want to get in the Inc. 5000. You want to make some, want to put your kids through school. You want to do that kind of stuff. Then when people buy, really the best way to play the game is to call them. And so for a month and a half in Science of Skill, when we got up to a scale where we're making sales every day, dozens of sales, or even a dozen sales a day, calling people up and saying, hey, this is Dan from Science of Skill. Thanks so much for purchasing. How did you hear about us? And then learning what are their actual goals and objectives? Why did they find us? Why did they buy from us? There's 100 frickin' places where you can purchase this kind of stuff on the internet. What was it about what we're doing? What is your situation? Who are you? Kind of age, location, this kind of stuff. And so we came to learn, I'll talk specifically about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, which is where we started this business. These were, average of 42-year-old guys, males generally, 9 out of 10 times male, who trained between 1 and 3 times a week, who generally were white belts. 80% of the time were white belts, 80% or more. And they were really interested. The reason they came to us was because they wanted to know how to beat people who were stronger and more athletic. They weren't all short guys like me, but they were all like me in the fact that they're not going to win by muscle, because I just don't have the physical ability. And so they were like, look, I'm older, so I'm not going to win with weightlifting skill. I need tactics that are going to get me out there and winning trophies or just doing better in the gym. And so we got a better sense for them, and we got a better sense for what are their goals. Some of them wanted to be competitors. Some of them wanted to just have fun and get in shape. Some of them wanted self-defense. Some of them were interested in leg locks and submissions. Some of them were interested in defense. So we found the different things that they were interested in. And from there, we could figure out, okay, what are the routes we want to run them down based on knowing who the heck they are. So unless you have a good sense of what are their darn goals, it's very, very challenging to write segmentation. So I guess that would be the starting point, Mark. And I can talk a bit about what it would look like to begin the writing as well. But that homework has to be done first.
Yeah, and understanding your core audience, and again, that segmentation, that is the beginning. And from there, writing, and I'll let you comment on this, but from there, writing often sort of takes over on its own a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It can. I mean, if you know your audience well enough, writing becomes way easier. I think it's frustrating to write when you don't know your audience, because not only are you having to do a bunch of work, but you also, in the back of your mind, damn well that you're not sure that you're even appealing to anything that's real. You're just like, I'm swinging in the dark about this freaking, automation over here and this automation over here and this automation over here. I don't know if I'm hitting the nail on the head. I'm just writing these different channels. But if you know them really well, and you know how married they are to goal X or goal Y or goal Z, then when you're writing those, not only can you put it in their language and make it appealing, but you can actually make it effective and make it generate more sales. So after you generally, Mark, like pistol to temple. Now, every business is different, but generally, the way you want to segment your list as a default, if you don't want to become marketing automation expert boy, if you want to just have a default way of slicing up your list, the way to do that is by their goals. So what I mean by this is, what are they after? What is the end result? Generally, the end result of, whatever clump or group of people you're selling to, you can find a way to make it fit into between 3 and 5 buckets. You can find a damn way. So I know that was the case in the self-defense world, and it would be similarly for other businesses. If you have a marketing agency, there's going to be some people maybe who want to book more appointments. Their whole goal is selling more services. People want to sell more products. They want more clicks, more cart value, etc. And maybe there's people that want more leads or something. You figure out what the spread is on goals, and then you slice up your automation channels based on what you know damn well are their own self-selected most important goals. So you're not communicating with them with a general, I'm a marketing automation company or I'm a marketing agency message. You're saying, I'm going to deliver e-commerce sales for you. Here's my results that I've gotten in the past, specifically in that domain. So goal is the de facto segmentation strategy for a company. Now, if I got deep enough in any one company, I could find exceptions, but if you don't want to think, that's the way to do it. And the only way to really do it is call them. From there's one more step you want to get into before you write, Mark. I'll be brief about this, but there's one more step. The one other step is understanding that the top 2 desired outcomes that people have within any given goal. So let's call it goal A, B, and C. Okay, for goal A, what are the top 2 desired outcomes? And what are the top 2 biggest objections? What are the reasons that they wouldn't want to do this? And so if you know those, then you know the buttons you have to push and the buttons you have to stay away from in order to make sure you can close those sales. So if I started talking, Mark, to all the people who are explicitly interested in competition, the end objectives that they'd want is for our particular audience anyway, is they want to have a sense and a feeling that they have some kind of a plan to know they're getting better month over month. These are people that want to I'm going in there, the teacher's teaching whatever they want. I don't know if I'm actually improving my skills. So some degree of a plan was important for them. And also competition proven techniques. Like they wanted moves that worked against stronger people. And not everybody's coach was an expert at beating people twice their size. So they wanted to find a guy that could help with that. So those were kind of 2 big ones. And then in terms of objections, we had a whole slew of those as well. On the competition side of things, we had folks who really felt like maybe video learning would just never fit the bill of private lessons. It's not really going to add value. I was never going to convince them that it would be a replacement, but we had to basically make it clear that it could be a useful supplement. And I was a good case study of that because a lot of my own learning was on video. So once we knew that the top 2, what they want, and the top 2, what's going to stop them from buying, then for each of those goals, we could actually make sure every email is hitting the button that's ultimately going to generate conversions and appeal to what people really care about. So that upfront homework is actually harder than doing the writing. Any schmo can write 100 emails. I think to really know your customers and make sure you're delivering value is the bigger challenge.
Yeah, those are awesome points. And we could actually delve into that for the duration, but I don't want to because I want to talk about your 7-figure exit. Yeah. And again, I mean, that stuff is awesome. But let's talk about the 7-figure exit because this is a goal a lot of people have. They have a business, it's growing, it's doing pretty well. Maybe it provides a pretty decent income for them. But they want to have that 7-figure exit because it's nice to have on the resume. It's a personal goal of theirs. At what point in your ownership of Science of Skill did you decide, I think I want to sell this someday? And did you ever have a goal and a number of mind before you went into that?
Totally. I'll lay this on you. I knew I wanted to sell it before I started, Mark. Again, the whole goal was I need a sacrificial lamb to move on to my life purpose, right? And I wasn't exactly sure how. Now I have a business model for tech emergence and staff, and we're doing things. But when I first started, I just knew I'd like to be able to proliferate an ethical conversation about kind of the applications, implications of these very important technologies. Don't know how I'm going to make a dime. I need another way to fund this. And so Science of Skill from the get-go was only a sacrificial lamb for my other goals. I never started this thing because I want to be an e-commerce mogul by any means. I wanted to get out of there. And to be honest, Mark, so before day one, to answer your question on when did I know I was going to sell, my thought was once I got it up to maybe 40, 50 grand a month in recurring revenue, I would, of course, find a buyer. Oh, isn't it so obvious? Of course I would find a buyer. That would be twice the size of my martial arts gym, $500,000 a year run rate. of course we're going to find a buyer. 25% margin, of course we're going to find a buyer. As it turns out, and I actually, I was working with Amanda from Quiet Light way back in the day on this, when we were, only about a year and a half old or something. Banks, in order to, so oftentimes it's going to be a bank that's going to front the upfront money to get these transitions done. The buyer is going to use a bank to loan the upfront cash to get a deal done. Banks really want to see a whole bunch of years of tax returns, at least 3 years of tax returns. And so the frustrating thing, Mark, was I couldn't sell when I wanted to. I would have been perfectly happy getting, $250,000, maybe $350,000 for the business when we were about a year and a half, 2 years old. Maybe $500,000. And I really realistically would have only expected to maybe get 200 down. And I thought that would be a win, and I'd be out, and I'd move the hell on to what I wanted to do with my life. But as it turns out, I had to split my hours, 40 hours science skill, 40 hours tech emergence. I had to do that for 4 years until we had the runway. So always knew I wanted to sell it. As it turns out, it wasn't really viable until the banks had it. So when you double 1 year, they say, oh, you're lucky. You double 2 years, they say, oh, you're lucky. You double 3 years, you're doing multiple millions of dollars. A bank has to shut up, and they have to accept that you're a real damn company and be willing to foot the damn money. So for us, it was actually harder to get banks to put up the cash because banks don't understand e-commerce. They understand pizza shops. They understand trucking businesses. They understand stuff that their great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers would have done for business models. They don't understand anything that could have happened sort of after maybe 1980. So we really had to convince them with more financials than I wanted to take the time to develop, but that's what it took. So always wanted to sell it. I had a goal of a much lower exit price. The silver lining there was instead of $500,000, we got $1 million. And instead of 40% down, we got 90% down, which was a much better cash upfront arrangement. So it worked out, but it was tougher than I thought in the early days.
I like how you just casually say, yeah, it was worth it. Yeah, I got about twice what I was expecting and 90% down.
Years of my life were pretty toilsome years of my life. But yes, it was I'm out of there now, right? And yeah. I think I built, luckily, I think what did happen, Mark, I can say this is another part of the blessing in disguise. In those last 2 years running the company, I had to be a grown-up and really implement a lot of systems, a lot of processes to separate myself, get my time way out of science and skill. And what that did was tangibly built something that a buyer could come in and just run. And luckily, we found some buyers that were very capable business people on their own. And our systems were so down pat and so tight that even though I had some degree, and it wasn't actually very much at all, but some degree of obligatory consultative stuff, and then they could pay to have me consult even later on. I had about 2 phone calls with them after the sale, and we were out. So I felt kind of proud that the team had built something so streamlined that buyers would just be able to get the value out of it from day one, run away from me, leave, and have it as their own baby now. So I think in terms of value to a buyer, I think we built a better business too. So I was proud of what the team did there. For sure.
Yeah, and that what you're talking about there is, if anyone's ever heard me give a talk at a conference or studied our website, I talk about these 4 pillars all the time, 4 pillars of value, and their risk, growth, transferability, and documentation. And that transferability, it makes a huge difference, because if you didn't do that, if you didn't take the time to separate yourself out, yeah. We had talked already. You started to blow up because of YouTube videos of you beating larger opponents, and so that right there would be a huge yellow flag.
Right, it was tied to me in the early days. Yeah,
exactly. It was tied to you in the early days. So how did that process go? How did you attack that initially, and how long would you say it took you to really kind of extricate yourself from the business so it ran on its own?
Yep, there were 2 parts of this, Mark. It's a great question. There's the front end part, which is basically unmarrying Dan Fagella from Science of Skill. So not being the name at the bottom of the emails, not being the name at the bottom of the blog post, not being the name at the bottom of the sales pages, any of that stuff. That's front end. Back end is not being the one doing the work, making the actual gears turn. So there's actually both sides. There's the do you look like you're necessary? And then, well, in the back office, are you necessary? And working on both of those is important. I had a mentor for a little bit, who is a old guy from the semiconductor industry. And he kind of gave me an exercise about a year before I sold, where he said, well, you got to figure out, everything that you are you're doing the doing on. You're not delegating it. You're actually turning the cranks, whether it's, bookkeeping stuff, whether it's communicating with affiliates and sales channels, whatever it is, whatever the doings are, you need to just create that into a checklist and check them off when you now have a weekly system where someone else handles it and all you do is delegate it. And that was one of the best bits of advice I ever got, because by the time I sold the company, I was working an average of maybe 18, 19 hours a week. And it was really all meetings. There was no more actual doing marketing, actual doing copy, actual doing sales communication. It was just talking to the team, making sure we're good, going back to tech emergence, working on artificial intelligence, what the hell I wanted to do anyway. And so the process of having to grow beyond, I wanted to sell when we were $500,000. The process of having to get to 2 million top line was also having to mature our systems and processes to build a better product for a buyer. So it's both sides of that coin. And I think creating that tick list of where are you on the front of the business, where a buyer is going to know damn well that they cannot replace your picture with theirs and become the owner, and then get rid of those. Check. Back office. What are all the doings, not the delegatings? What are the doings that you are actually turning the cranks to make the operations happen? And check those bad boys off as soon as you have a weekly accountable process where you delegate that to somebody else on the team. So creating those two lists was a massive deal for me. And that real process, I hate to say to get it, I could have sold the business without doing that. I just would have gotten much less money up front, Mark. I would have had a bigger earnout. But it took about maybe a year or 18 months to really have both of those just slain, absolutely slain, to the point where I was now the delegator and the guy who was there on some of the meetings, and the team was just kind of running the whole show, and I wasn't even visible to the front of the business. So yeah, took quite a bit to get all the way there. But the good news is, Mark, the listeners, you don't have to go that far to make a business saleable, but of course it's nice if you can.
Right. And that's what you want to do if you want to get the most value out of a business.
Exactly.
And one of the big things to keep in mind too, that people need to understand is if you're the name at the bottom of an email that people receive, you can't just take that off 1 month before you sell. Because most people are going to say that's great. Let's see how this plays out over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right? Totally. Let's see if you are actually doing this the right way. So that time that you put in, it did add a lot of value. So we talked about time, getting enough time on the books, and that 3 years and 4 years worth of history. That's important, making it transferable. What else would you say you really had to work on to prepare the business for sale? What other obstacles do you think that you really had to work on?
Yeah, well, one thing, when I sold my first business, which was that martial arts academy I told you about, luckily we did get it back up to speed pretty quickly after the horrendous roof collapse, despite coming pretty close to being a bankrupt 23-year-old guy. Even after selling that business, I still was kind of foreign to QuickBooks. I was a master of the marketing automation software, but like a white belt, a blue belt in QuickBooks, looking at P&Ls, being adamant about the numbers and details there. And one of the things that was really pivotal for selling Science of Skill was that I actually, to own your finances, to have the cleanest books in the universe, and to understand every detail about those books garners massive confidence in a buyer. Massive confidence. So I do remember one call. It was like a 90-minute call with Jason. And our buyers, again, talented guys, experienced business people. I'm proud as hell of what they're doing with the company now. And I of everybody that I even had conversations with who could have bought it, I'm rather glad that they did. Great guys. They were asking all the right questions, all the questions that I would ask. Hardcore stuff about individual months, variations in profit, variation in advertising expense, variation in outsource and development stuff, big crazy hiccups in terms of IT costs and different things like that. And without looking at QuickBooks, just saying, hey, June 2016, I'd be like, oh yeah, this happened. Here's the part in the marketing metrics where you can see where this is reflected and what was happening with our emails and why this sort of went down. But here's how we recovered from it. Here's the new automation that we kind of set up to put in place and yada, yada. And so like every single question was just like without breaking eye contact, was just like bam, 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 answering all the finance stuff. And I think that call was where I felt like momentum shifted towards, okay, they're probably going to buy. Because they knew that none of the stuff in QuickBooks was fudged, and it was not outsourced to some little old lady. I was grilling the hell out of it, and I knew exactly the factors that led to having that net hit that bottom line thick. And I think that garners a lot of confidence. So if there's any software you can master, have it not be your content management system, have it not be your marketing automation system, have it be your darn QuickBooks. Know your numbers super well, and buyers will respect the heck out of that.
Yeah, and I say this as well at conferences and on this podcast. I'm sure I've said it before. It always baffles me how in the online space, we have so many metrics at our disposal, right? Just analytics alone, if you set up analytics properly. But if you're using marketing automation software, you've got all these analytics. But then we completely ignore the bottom line analytics, which is our QuickBooks, or we just kind of pay lip service to it. But there's so much data in there if we know how to use it.
Yep. And I literally, I mean, when we got to the point where I could afford it, Mark, and I don't know if everybody wants to do this, but so I knew, especially after talking to brokers for 2.5 years, being frustrated that none of the banks would front the money for this thing. I realized that if the banks were eventually going to front the money when we had 3 years of tax returns, they were going to be asking every financial question in the book, and they were going to want the cleanest books that have ever existed under the sun and moon. And so what I ended up doing was paying an outsourced accounting firm. They didn't actually do my end of year tax return, but they were kind of doing my ongoing work, where they were updating it every week, and we would have a half-hour call every Tuesday, and I would just grill everything. I would look at all the changes. I would look at the revenue, and I would look at the expenses. I would make sure that maps onto what I was doing, and I got like this over the course of a couple months, just a spider sense of when variances imply different things that would have ramifications in the future. Is this a merchant account issue that might be happening? Is this, should we be spending more on advertising because we're going to have a ton of net, but are we going to have the same net next month, based on what things have looked like historically? So having that consistent weekly pulse where I was accountable to an accounting professional, in this case, it was a bookkeeper I was talking to mostly, but the accountant was also on the call, half an hour every week. That was what developed a spider sense. And man, I hate to say that regular business life never taught me that stuff. It was forcing myself to pay a professional, talk regularly, make sure I knew every damn detail about what drove net. That kind of gave me the MBA in that area, because I was just forced to pay for their time and learn it. So that's what I had to do to learn it, Mark. I wish I could tell you I was so smart that I was born with an accounting brain. Not the case. I'm a marketing and sales guy, man. My goal is growth. And I had to learn finances by, working hard and studying the heck out of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're almost out of time. I want to ask maybe just two more quick questions here about the sale. First, when you actually put it to the market, how long did it take you from when we put it to the market and first started talking to buyers to actual closing? About how long was that period?
Well, I mean, I had listed it a bunch of other times in the past, as I had mentioned, probably 4 or 5 times before I worked with you guys again. And I listed it with Amanda many, many years ago, and it was up for 9-10 months or so. And again, the banks were kind of the major hindrance. But when we had 3 years of tax returns, and when my hours were now at 20 or less a week, from the time that I first sat down with Jason and talked with him, which was actually in Oakland, we sat down at a cafe. To the time we sold, it was like 4.5, 5 months. And it was to a T what the listing was, $1 million, a little bit over $1 million counting inventory and all the rest of that stuff, a little bit over $1 million total expense, 90% cash down. And sold for exactly what it was listed for exactly then. Jason was the one who told me, we could have listed it for a slightly higher multiple because the business was worth it. But Jason knew that my goal was cash down because I got a startup to build here. I'm not trying to be rich when I'm 55 years old. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we got some damn money. I got to hire some damn professional because I have a freaking business to grow. So he said, look, if that's your goal, you can get $1 million for this thing, and I bet you I can turn it quick. I was like, all right, I'll trust you. And it was 4.5, 5 months in, and the payment hit the account, and it was a real thing.
Yeah, and you got an SBA loan, or the buyers got an SBA loan, correct?
The buyers did go with the SBA.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it was the bank that kind of footed the bill, and the bank they didn't, even when they sent the money, the bank had no idea what we did. They, where's your office? We don't have one.
Right.
Where are your trucks? We don't have them, right? The bank doesn't know what the hell. In internet-based business, they got no clue. But they saw net, and they were like, all right, whatever, man. Here's some money. Like, you guys are making it. Whatever, take it. Call it a day. So banks are frustrating, but we convinced them by raw force of making money that they should pay us to sell this damn thing, and it ended up going through. So.
Yeah, and that's awesome, right? One last question. After the sale, so you finished the sale, I believe it was around February of this year.
Yeah.
How's life been after? How's your new startup going? And any regrets at all?
No regrets. I can say, there were some hiccups post-sale in terms of like, oh, well, how are we going to factor for these refund chargeback things and these sales that happened here and these sales that happened there, and like having to kind of go back and forth with that stuff. In the end, I'd say it's a wash. I don't necessarily blame it on the malevolence or the malevolence or stupidity of myself or of the buyers. It's just stuff that had to shake out. It kind of makes sense we dealt with it, but all in all, like pretty much zero friction until sale. A little bit of stuff to tackle afterwards in terms of how are we going to handle some other additional expenses, but in the grand scheme of things, kind of nothing. And so transition-wise, I don't think within the bounds of reality, I could have hoped for anything better. And I've told Jason that like a bunch of different times. And I've told the buyers on a number of different occasions that I'm just glad as hell that they're the ones running it, because I think that my team is getting treated well. I think the business is going to turn into kind of, what I would have been proud of if I was still running it. So that's been great. I'm now out here in San Francisco. And so I'm able to, get interviews at Facebook headquarters and Airbnb headquarters and talk to some great AI folks and researchers out in this domain and focus on growing our traffic and our media in this space. And so that's been my whole focus. It's actually been a lot of growing and building the team and growing and building the traffic, and to be able to focus on that 80 hours a week instead of just 40. It's having to do 40 in AI and then 40, selling stuff on the internet. It's for like a whole month, it was like a waking up and not really believing it kind of thing. Now it's kind of normal, but I'm still very, very grateful that it all happened the way it did. So I'll have new challenges ahead, but luckily, unlike any other venture I've ever had, I've bootstrapped everything I've ever done. We've got the real cash in the bank to build something great. And I also feel like my team is still getting treated great at Science of Skill. So all in all, good times. Very excited to see what will happen with the startup in the coming months. But yeah, man, I mean, it's about as good as I could have hoped. So I'm happy about it.
So how can people contact you if they have any questions or just want to pick your brain for a couple minutes?
Yeah, sure. I pretty frequent that I'll get random, from like the Business Insider piece or whatever, like, hey man, I'm trying to sell this kind of company. Happy to like, fling stuff back. I definitely learned a lot of hard lessons here. People can find me on Twitter, just at Dan Fagella. I'll get like private messages or just people hitting me up there. And there's two things that might be relevant based on what we've talked about. I did an article about kind of the process leading up to sale on Tech Emergence that I'll link to. People, may or may not be interested in AI from this interview, Mark. But if they're interested in the process, the emotional ups and downs of what actually getting a sale done is like, I'll make sure I include that for you. And then email segmentation wise, if people are interested in how we did that at Science of Skill, I did write a pretty robust blog post about how you slice and dice a list to get 50-70% more sales per send than if you don't slice and dice a list. So I have a pretty robust article on our strategies there. So I can include that stuff, and otherwise, ping me on Twitter or just Dan at Tech Emergence. Happy to hear from you, and let me know that you heard me through Mark's show.
All right, and we will be putting those links in the actual post on our website. So if you want to see that, go over to our website, click on podcasts, look for this episode, and we'll have those links included. Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Mark, thank you so much for hiring Jason and getting him to sell my company.
It's definitely our pleasure. Hey, have a good one.
Cool. Yep.